as a person or as a human being you want to do with your own life, or what would I want to do with my own life? And that could be on the very personal level, right? What is it that you want to do that might feel right? What is it that you want to do that might help others, that might have a positive impact on society?
No. Welcome to the Nomadic Mind,
Thank you.
Felix. It's such a pleasure having you on the show. You and I have known each other for many, many years. In fact, I literally met you at my house. Since then, we formed a very close friendship. Out of all of my close friends around the world, you are the only one that has lived at my house in India, which is a great honor, I would imagine. But obviously today you're here because I think the path that you've chosen in life is one that's very unique and one that a lot of people can learn from, especially those that are younger that are considering becoming scientists when they grow up. So, I mean, in the introduction that was given to the audience, you are a scientist, but you're not limited to being a scientist. Can you please explain to the audience exactly how you see yourself and how your career plays into your identity?
I definitely don't see myself as a scientist or anything in particular for that matter. But I guess a lot of the work that I've done tends to be bundled together with what people call science or research or academics or whatever it might be. So I think it's a bit more complicated than that. But in the sense of talking about putting a label to it, I think that's really tough. But yeah, what else were you thinking in terms of that word?
I wouldn't say just that word. I think with the conversations that you and I have been having before this podcast, we talked about how you have a greater vision for what it is that you want to do with this life. And becoming a scientist and getting involved with research was just a stepping stone for you to make your way towards that greater vision.
Right. Okay, I see. Yeah. Well, I guess when we talk about, what we did speak about was essentially what is it that as a person or as a human being you want to do with your own life, or what would I want to do with my own life? And that could be on the very personal level, right? What is it that you want to do that might feel right, or that might be fun, that might be enjoyable, or it might be on the social level. What is it that you want to do that might help others, that might have a positive impact on society? Or it could go even further than that in terms of your legacy throughout history, over time, for future generations to come. Or it might simply be some kind of expression, finding expression in how you live your life in a meaningful way or not. It could be so diverse, but in the example I gave earlier, it could be about, for example, learning to play an instrument, writing a song, composing a song, putting that together, going through that whole process, ending up with something which is a result of your creative process, and having that be put out there for it to impact others in some kind of way, or at least received by others. Whether there's a message entrenched or ingrained within that, and whether you intended it for it to be that way, could also be a factor in that too. It could be painting, creating a painting. It could be skateboarding, cruising on the street, or actually moving in a way in which you decide to film a video because there's a certain aesthetic to it, to whatever it is that the trick you just did, and putting it together, cutting it, editing it, adding a song to it, and putting it out there, giving a whole feel for the audience to sort of get a taste of. And so I see, for me, it was about finding a way to do these kinds of things in a meaningful way, but to make a career out of it so that you can keep doing it and get supported financially, right? And having an interest in the natural environment in culture, in history, in different types of aesthetics, and putting it all together, research or academia just seemed to be something that made sense, because I get to really travel and go to different places, yes, but with the purpose of exploring different ideas, working with different people, building different collaborations and networks to then sort of try to answer bigger questions, but also to actually come up with new questions. All of that together. And in this case, it's looking at the intersections of culture, history, ecology, all together in one, and really exploring the different nuances of those ideas.
I think that's, first of all, that's so cool. What you do for a living is really interesting, and how you've framed that whole greater vision and the stepping stones you're taking to that greater vision is inspiring. And I would imagine that would inspire 16-year-old me as much as it does me right now. Because when I was 16, I had an idea of what it is that I wanted life to be about, but how to get there and how to build a career, how to build a life to live that kind of creative, collaborative life, I had no idea. You know, on one hand, I would have my parents suggesting, like, maybe become a doctor, maybe do this, maybe do that. On the other hand, society is saying other things, like I should do. Well, actually, given the circumstances that I was in, both sides were saying doctor, business person, engineer.
Yeah. Which is good.
These are all fantastic career options. But I think what I found really jarring at the time is that the same advice was being given to everybody. You know, the same advice to be these things were being given to everybody. And some people went down that path, and some people were meant to go down that path.
Absolutely.
Other people who went down that path were not meant to go down that path. Yeah. And at some point in their journey found themselves leaving that path to start anew. But it's that distance between starting what other people thought you should do to then going on and doing what you think you should do, where I find a lot of people stuck for varying amounts of time. Some people jump straight into the new thing, and within a couple months, they're like making waves. Yeah. But other people are stuck for much longer than that, right? So I mean, just to wrap it back around, when you were 16, were you very sure that you wanted to go ahead and become a scientist, or was it just an experimentation thing for you?
I never wanted to be a scientist.
Cool.
I still don't feel like I want to be one. I think the word is too limiting. I think the concept, the ideas of it is too limiting. But I definitely always knew that this was the path that I wanted to follow in terms of exploring those interactions between culture, society, nature, and ecology. That whole intersection, that's always something that I wanted to do. And then that sort of manifested in different ways, whether it's a specific interest in some kind of animal or some kind of plant, of course, but for sure. Yeah, there was never any doubt. Every step of the way, I was like, I knew that this is what I got to do to go towards that direction. Oh, I have to go through this to go towards that direction. I have to go this to get to that next step. So lucky, I guess I was fortunate in that sense. There wasn't too much self-doubt or questioning or trying to, figure out which way I should take when I reach a crossroads. That kind of comes later on in life, but at that time, yeah, it was quite seamless.
Nice. What is your research about?
Exactly that. The intersection of culture, society, nature, and ecology within the framework of conservation.
Wow.
So conservation being, of course, a broad word, right? A broad word to conserve, to protect, to keep whole, to not allow to degrade. But that can be both for, I guess in the contemporary sense of the word, that could be for the forest, it could be for the ocean, it could be for the natural environments, the ecosystems that we depend upon, but that we depend upon both in terms of the material values that they provide, but also in terms of the non-material values that they provide. But it can also be the conservation of culture, of history, of architecture, of music. So I think that the multiple definitions of that word in itself is fascinating and is my main interest in this case.
Do you feel like you're fighting a losing battle with conservation? I ask that because you say the conservation of culture, right? I don't know what the exact statistic is, but thousands of languages, cultures die off every day, every month, every year, right? And these are all like small subcultures around the world that have existed. What kind of cultures are you trying to preserve, or is that not even part of the work that you're doing? Are you more trying to shed light on certain cultures, explore how certain cultures exist in the modern day?
I'll be very selfish in my answer and say that I'm simply using this as a conduit to explore things that I find very interesting.
Cool.
And that I could interact with, and also end up meeting people that also help me learn a lot of things in which I can hopefully be of mutual benefit, and we can together sort of build a collaboration, build a network, and grow from there. So for me, it's never really been about saving the world, saving that culture, saving that whatever it might be, right? It's, of course, that's great. If that happens, that's great. But I think that this concept of being a savior, or the psyche of being a savior or a hero, is very dangerous. And so that's something that I tend to navigate away from. And rather than that, within the word of conservation, right, as much as it means to protect, I think it's more about protecting that sort of open-mindedness. And so allowing yourself to try to navigate those ideas without necessarily having a strict end goal in sight. And try to understand where other people might be coming from, or even where other non-human animals might be coming from. What's their perspective? That kind of thing. Rather than having a set, defined goal in terms of what needs to be protected, what is threatened, what is at risk, what should I be trying to safeguard?
Do you say, are you saying that having a hero mindset is dangerous because it forces people to get into action before they even understand what the problem is in the first place?
Yes.
Okay.
Like precisely that. Precisely that. That's it. People might have great intentions. The whole world full of good intentions. Anywhere you go, good intentions. How they manifest in the actions and words, that's a different story. And the result is, of course, a very different story. So keep your intentions pure, but also before allowing them to manifest in your actions and your words, try to understand what the picture is. Right? And try to at least, or at least that's what I try to do. And I try to calculate what would be the best thing to do in that case, while trying to follow through with your intentions. And that goes for anything. Conservation aside, right? That goes for the food you cook. It's about eating at restaurants. Do you know what those people, you don't know what the people in those kitchens are thinking of what they're intending and what they're doing while cooking that food, right? Whether it's the way that they might be putting the ingredients together, or the way that they would just want the clock to tick so that they can go home to work, or the other way around. It might be that they actually want to make sure that the people that are eating the food are healthy, are feeling satisfied, are having a wholesome experience, are being one with the ingredients that are being put into the plate. That kind of thing. It could be into artwork. What do you intend the audience to feel from that piece? What do you intend them to learn from it or to gain from it?
Yeah.
Music, painting, sculptures, pottery, whatever it might be. So I think intention is a very important word and a very important concept.
I think that thought in itself is beautiful, and it almost feels like it's lacking somehow in society to a large extent, because we are a very fast-moving society, and the fact that several ideas are channeled to us through our phones, the response that it elicits is us double tapping oftentimes and approving of ideas that get funneled towards us, right? And just the way that programmatic advertising and the way the algorithms work is that the same ideas that we entertain are the same ideas that are funneled to us, or the people around us that entertain certain ideas, we end up being exposed to those same ideas, right?
Yeah.
And so ideas come and go very, very quickly. So I suppose it doesn't allow people the time to ruminate over what the hell is going on around them, right? What kind of lifestyle do you live that allows you to take your time and to ponder things and to really think about things before you take action? And have you found that that's had a negative effect on your life as well, taking a long time to understand something before you do it?
As in your everyday,
Yeah.
mundane activities,
Yeah.
whether it's hopping on the bus or eating your food or going to sleep, breathing, for sure, breathing, being aware of your breath. And that could be through simple activities, you know, whether it's Kapalbhati or pranayama daily, or simply while you're walking, being aware of your inhalation through your nose and your exhalation through your mouth, and feeling how the air is moving through your chest and your gut. So definitely breathing, I think. Or even just taking time, reminding yourself to take time before you respond. Consciously give yourself like a 3 to 5 second pause and then respond. I don't think you can go wrong in that case.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely breathing, being conscious and aware of your breath, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Is that a practice throughout the day?
Throughout the day. But of course, there are certain times where you can really focus on it in a different kind of way, right?
That's right.
So whether it's the morning, first time, you know, the first thing you do after waking up, after giving thanks for life, you know, greeting the sun, listening to the birds.
Yeah.
You can focus on your breath through certain types of activities, like pranayama, for example. And then applying that to your everyday activities is where it becomes very potent. You know, that's why this age is really scary. Physical books still exist. And that's, you know, when we come down to painting, it's another thing that you can do physically tangible, but everything else online. Songs, you know, articles, pictures.
Yeah, it can all be gone in an instant.
Instant. And that leaves the question, what are our descendants 1,000 years from now going to see or perceive from us, in the same way that how do we perceive ancient Mesopotamia or ancient China or ancient Egypt versus how people in the future might perceive us. And it all comes down to what's left.
Yeah.
Like you look at in Egypt, the Library of Alexandria burnt down.
Yeah, very sadly.
And, you know, during the age of Cleopatra, that was 2,300 years ago.
Yeah.
Information about the ancients, or who were the ancients to them,
Yeah.
was in that library.
Yeah.
And all of that knowledge is gone today.
Yeah.
As a result of that, how they built the pyramids, where the purpose was, who saw them, what kinds of rituals and events and things happened there. All of that, or just even snapshots into daily lives of people back then, that's all gone. So what if that happens to the internet 1,000 years from now? I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, but if it happens, it'll just go to show that whatever it is that we're all creating today, that's all online, it won't matter.
That's right.
If that happens, in that case, 1,000 years from now. Or it could be the opposite. 1,000 years from now, the internet might simply be the archetype of something even better, or something even bigger, more expansive, for which its roots remain intact and still approachable.
Yeah, I wonder how important or relevant storytelling will be 1,000 years from now as it is now. Because historically, a lot of the documentation that we have tells stories about civilizations that lived in the past, right? And we as human beings today take inspiration for from how people lived in the past to live life now, because we still are very much the same. We just have started to become a more digitized society now. But I imagine 1,000 years from now, it'll be digitized to the extent where our actual consciousness is being uploaded to you know, the internet or whatever it may be called at that time. And any story can be fabricated and be true. You know, like you can create any sort of environment on like an Unreal Engine type of thing, and you can basically rewrite history for yourself or write your future.
Yeah, but I mean, that could have easily happened in the past too.
How so?
All we know about history is what's been written. You know, the victor always writes the history.
Yes, that's true. Victor writes history by often burning history as well.
Well, so there you go.
Yeah.
So I think it's always it could always go either way. You know,
Yeah.
whatever fears or concerns people might have about digital consciousness in the future and creating certain artificial truths has always been a thing. It's just that I think the medium is different. We're talking about microchips and wires as opposed to stone and papyrus scrolls.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
there was one more very like revered library in northern India. Do you remember what it was called?
No.
So I think this is like the oldest university in the world, which is geographically located in what is now Pakistan, I think. But it was famous because people from all walks of life around the earth would go and study there. Yeah. And they would, you know, they had a massive library.
What's that university called? Ooh, but yeah, that university you're talking about,
I mean, I do have my phone on me.
Yeah.
We can just hold on. Let me just check.
It's on the tip of my tongue. I just can't.
Yeah, oldest university in the world. Okay, that's not what I'm looking for. India.
Whatever you see, if it's Oxford, it's a lie.
Nalanda? What the hell? I don't think that's it. Oldest ancient university. Ancient. What the Is it Nalanda?
Don't know. Doesn't ring a bell, but maybe.
Taxila.
I mean, you tell me. I mean.
Yeah. Whatever. There's a bunch of names here, but okay.
Yeah, why did I feel like there was one in Madhya Pradesh?
They're
like a really old one.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure what's in Madhya Pradesh. There's a lot of old institutions in Madhya Pradesh. I'm not sure which one exactly you're referring to.
I mean, I know there's a whole lot of old universities across the Maghreb, you know, northern Africa, and spanning into all the way to Mesopotamia. There's a lot of very old universities, but yeah, I don't know how that compares to South Asia.
Felix, how good is your general history? I mean,
as good and as far as my interests go so far.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Which might not be that far.
Yeah. No, I mean, the conversation we just had about documentation really inspired me.
I find history, not only is it fascinating, it's important.
It is. I think learning art history was the most important subject I learned in school.
Someone once said, a wise man once said, or woman once said that there are no branches without the roots. And if you don't know where your roots are going, how are you going to know where the branches are flowering?
Wow. Who said that?
I think I heard Burning Spears say it once.
Yeah,
he's a legendary musician. I heard him say it once, but I forget where the saying comes from. But yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
I think I hold that idea very close to heart because it's a mission in my lifetime to trace my family. And I don't mean that in a genealogy type of way. I mean that in their actual stories and what made them who they were and how their life stories influenced the next generation and so on. I feel like if you can trace that back to the further you can trace that back in your own personal history, I feel that gives your overall family a stronger story, you know? And from where I stand, stories are everything.
For sure.
In life, you know? Absolutely,
yeah. And that almost gives, when we're talking about finding purpose in life, finding meaning in life, knowing your history or knowing your ancestral roots or knowing the history of not necessarily your genealogy, but the history of the context in which you live, kind of provides this type of motivation or the direction in which to move forward and to keep pushing it forward, right? So
yeah, that is true, actually. It's not just about the history of your own family, but also the history of where you're living.
yeah.
And I suppose how your story is influenced by where you live and how you contribute to the story of where you live as well.
And also, it's not necessarily about the straight factual history. It's also about seeing how history is written. And like approaching it, trying to approach it from a very, or at least as least biased as possible, where you can sort of see, okay, they might have written that because they dominated them, or they did this and they did that, or they might have written this because they felt oppressed by this and by them, that kind of way. And sort of imagining these scenarios and all of that while reading into history is also a very fascinating process, I think, as well.
Yeah. You know, like you said, reading history and understanding history is a very fascinating process, right? Yeah. It stimulates the imagination, makes you think about the world. And I mean, that's what I have in common with other people who enjoy reading history. But it's how has learning history helped you in an applicable, practical way in life?
Because you can kind of get a sense of the foundation on which people stand, or the foundation on which certain cultural practices or societal norms, contemporary societal norms, music, food, all of that. Not only do you kind of get a better understanding of it, but rather than getting a better understanding of it, it provides tools for you to understand it in that moment. And it actually provides interest into those things, right? Like, for example, if you give me a food, what's a food you like?
Avocados.
Okay, avocados, whatever it might be. You can pick if you try to sort of see where that comes from.
Yeah.
Right? Why are we all eating avocados? Why are you paying, such and such dollars to have a slice of this on a slice of bread, whatever it might be? Or why, but if you look at where the fruit comes from, how it was transported from the Americas into the European markets, and then ended up being grown in Kenya, in Australia, successfully to continue supplementing the current ongoing craze for avocados. But you can see where it comes from in South America, and how people have been using it traditionally for all those years. And then even further from that, you can look at it ecologically or evolutionarily speaking. Why does the avocado have such a big pit? Well, it's because the animals that were eating avocados were big, the giant sloths, right? And so the avocado ended up developing this giant seed to then be pooped out somewhere else after it was eaten by the animal. So any food has a fascinating history, I think. And so the same thing could be applied to music or clothing or certain colors that people wear, or language, especially language too. So I think it just gives you this motivation to want to understand things more, and I think it just makes life more fun.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, fundamentally, you're inquisitive, right? You're inquisitive as a person. Is this nature or nurture? Were you nurtured to be an inquisitive person, or would you say you were naturally quite inquisitive growing up?
I don't know.
Yeah. If you had to nurture an inquisitive nature in somebody else, how would you do it?
I don't know if I would want to. I think it's almost better if it just comes about naturally, and I think that's even more powerful if it just comes.
Yeah, it's true. I know a lot of inquisitive people who might not go the extra mile to try and go deep on subjects and learning the history of things and all that. I mean, there's varying degrees to which people do that, right? You have people who kind of skim things on the surface, but then you have people who make it their careers to become these cultural detectives.
Yeah, and then that gets tricky too. So.
What do you mean it gets tricky?
Well, if you're always going to live your life asking questions about people, then it becomes this one-way street or maybe the other might not feel as if the other might feel a bit more objectified in that sense. You know, the first thing you do, you see someone on the street and you go, hey, within the first 5 minutes, where are you from? No, like, where are you from?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I guess curiosity is a very good thing.
Yeah.
And curiosity is what is, you know, curiosity has led to innovation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, once again, going back to the intentions, how do you follow through with those intentions?
It does seem like curiosity leads to a lot of identity building. You know, when you ask questions, you do get to learn more about the world around you. But how does it contribute to your identity?
That's the thing. Questions are important, right? Like in my youth, I might be asking questions left and right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to my elders or to my older peers, just questions. I want to know why this, why that, why this, why that, why that.
Yeah.
And then eventually, with time, you realize that, oh, wait, you don't make patience, breathe, breathe, and then the answers come, or you might come to the realization that the answers to whatever that question you were asking didn't matter. That question might not have mattered to ultimately what it was that you were trying to get to. Yeah. So questions are important, but they're not everything in terms of satisfying your curiosity or even learning.
Yeah. I mean, curiosity is cool because, just going back to the analogy of stepping stones, curiosity is you finding questions, or you looking for a stepping stone, and the answers are the stepping stone presenting themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And oftentimes in life, we just ask a lot of questions, not knowing exactly where it is that we're generally going or supposed to be going. But with you have a general curiosity to understand the world around you, the conservation of cultures, and, you know, how they tie into the environment. And so you're kind of forced to ask a lot of relevant questions so that you can get to, I guess, I wouldn't even say the right answer, but you're going in a direction, you know.
Well, that's the thing. In the end, it's not about the answer. It's about the direction. It's about the process, and it's about actually framing the question. Ultimately, it's coming up with that question by understanding or trying to sort of see what the broader picture is.
What kind of questions do you find yourself asking, or what kind of questions have you asked as a result of being on this path?
Why does it matter? Why do we care? Why do we as human beings care if a tiger disappears or if this rare flower disappears? That kind of thing. Ultimately, does it mean that as human beings will no longer be able to survive? No. I mean, that's not necessarily the case. I mean, maybe the whole earth tips on a very fragile and delicate balance, right? And it's very easy for anything to sort of shift that balance. And so any small shift in that could potentially perpetuate or potentially lead to a whole lot of other consequences. But at the same time, sometimes on a smaller scale, that might not always be the case. And it's not necessarily being for or against the preservation or the goal of protecting some kind of animal or plant or whatever it might be, but it's more so about taking it back a step and seeing and really understanding why people are doing these things. Why are we doing these things? Why are we putting in all of these resources into that kind of thing, and why is this being promoted everywhere? So I think that's a very important one, because oftentimes it's very easy to simply blindly following through with your good intentions. Again, going back to that intention, right? So asking that question, I think, is a really good humbling point to sort of question the concept as a whole, but also question yourself. Why are you following through with this? So for me, that's what it was.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the example you gave of tiger conservation, because I mean, I just got back from India,
Yeah.
you know the whole story there. I went out to look for tigers in the most densely populated tiger forest in the whole world, and we like saw one. After hours, and we went on 2 separate days. People are into tiger conservation. Tiger conservation matters, but it doesn't matter to everyone. It matters to the few people who believe that tigers should stay because of so new generations can see what tigers look like. I'm actually not even sure how to answer that question either. Why do people care whether or not tigers stick around? It's not like my everyday life revolves around the existence of tigers. Saber-toothed tigers existed once upon a time. Because they're gone now, it doesn't really affect my life very much. And honestly, like you said, you got to ask the question as to why this matters. And the fact of reality is a lot of conservation efforts just don't matter to people. I think I say people as a whole. Obviously, there's subsects of people that it matters to a lot, and they're the ones who are pushing for the conservation of, whether it be culture, language, species, whatever it is, right?
Which is all tied in together. Like, I mean, bringing up that example of tigers. Tigers are culturally very important to a lot of different groups. Yeah. Very important to a lot of different cultures. And so the loss of that tiger is a loss to that culture. It's a loss of that culture in a sense. So it goes back to people and to ethics in that way too.
It's interesting because your research is structured in a way where you're exploring the conservation of culture, but through reptiles and snakes, right? And the relevance of reptiles and snakes to different cultures. Snakes in particular,
which are reptiles, but and I mean, snakes are easy because they're figured and represented in so many contemporary cultures, but also a lot of ancient cultures and civilizations. It's an animal which has really affected or has had a very strong imprint on the human psyche throughout history, as well as evolutionary time. And so snakes are a very interesting one, but in addition to snakes and tigers and to animals that are very easily perceivable to people, I mean, we can also talk about other animals too, the small ones, insects. There's some insects that are very rare, or some very small frogs, amphibians that might be on the verge of extinction, yet their conservation matters to some people. But then the question is, why does it matter? And again, it's not about saying, no, we should just question it and therefore we should just let them be. No, it's about, again, going back to it. Why do we care about that, right? There's no defined answer for it, at least in my mind right now. But it's really zooming out, asking that question, and then jumping back in and saying, okay, so this is a thing. But when it comes down to snakes, I found that snakes were a very interesting window to jump through to explore that intersection between culture and conservation, or culture and ecology, whatever it might be. Again, snakes are found, you have of course, you had the ancient Mayans, the Olmecs, who worshipped serpent gods in a sense, whether it's Quetzalcoatl. You have the rainbow serpent myth with many indigenous tribes in Australia. You have, of course, the Nagas in India. You have the rod of Asclepius in ancient Greece. Of course, a whole lot of serpent-related myths in Eastern Asia. So, for me, that was probably the main reason why snakes became something of fascination, or really an important stepping stone to get to those ideas.
Because they're prevalent all around the world, and they're relevant to several cultures.
Yeah. There's something about snakes that has just captured the imagination of so many people over time.
You just mentioned. Can you tell us a little bit about what you know from each of those cultures that you just mentioned? Because even I'm curious, because I don't actually know for each one of them how the relevance of snakes differs and why they're revered in the first place. Because generally, when the average person looks at a snake, they're scared, because snakes are portrayed to be like these poisonous creatures that can bite you, and if they bite you, you're gonna die like within a minute, possibly, if they're venomous. And if their venom is that bad.
Because not all of them are venomous, not all of them are dangerous.
Exactly.
But it's hard to distinguish them if you don't know much about them.
Yeah, exactly. Which most people don't.
Understandably.
Understandably. But my question is, I wonder if a lot of these ancient societies, ancient civilizations revered snakes because of how lethal they were back then. Because these civilizations would live amongst snakes. Well, more so than we do now, I imagine.
I could tell you from experience, which again, the research brought me to southwestern India and the Western Ghats, and visiting the sacred groves over there, where many of these sacred groves are notorious or infamous for containing serpent gods, or for worshiping serpent gods. And so in these sacred groves in that part of Asia, there's a taboo against the killing of snakes, and people worship serpent gods, with serpent gods being specifically distinct from physical snakes that you see on the earth, right? But still there's an association, and therefore through the worshiping of serpent gods, there's a taboo against the killing of physical snakes, and there's some kind of sanctity surrounding those snakes, especially cobras, with the hood and all that. And I mean, you can see that throughout Hindu art, right? You see Lord Shiva with the naga wrapped around his neck with a hood, the spectacled pattern. You see Vishnu with Anant, the multiple-headed golden cobra escort, right? And so cobras in particular. But in general, there's a taboo against killing snakes within those sacred forests. And that could be for a variety of reasons. One might be strictly out of, what's that word? That word, reverence, right? Strictly out of reverence. So there's this not wanting to kill snakes because they're revered, they're sacred, they're they're a thing that's loved. But then there's another side of it, which is, let's not kill this snake because there is a fear of being afflicted by a nagadosha, or a snake curse, or serpent curse, or even being bitten by snakes. So again, both fear and devotion can be at play within one way in which people interact with this one animal within this one type of sacred space. And that other side, the fear side, is really fascinating, because it's fear drove devotion, which isn't necessarily that dissimilar from a lot of other concepts that involve spirituality, right? But in this case, the fear of getting bitten by a snake, of being potentially envenomated by a snake, or of being afflicted by a curse by a serpent god, is one of the main reasons why those snakes are not killed or revered in general.
That was in South India, right?
Southwestern India. So it was along the northern part of Kerala, the state of Kerala, and the southern part of the state of Karnataka, including the hills of Kodagu and the hills there.
What about the Aztecs? Have you found a similar reverence driven by fear in Aztec society?
I don't know much about that side, and unfortunately, Aztec society was decimated by colonialism. By the Spaniards the Spanish who arrived. So, it's unfortunate. But again, something which I find fascinating is the history of human-snake relationships and how that manifests into the present. So, for example, spiritualities coming out of South Asia ended up traveling towards East Asia, right? And whether that ended up being Hinduism or Buddhism. For example, you still have Hindu influences in the temples of Cambodia and Thailand, which in fact a lot of them were temples worshiping Shiva, such as Angkor Wat. Right, originally that was a temple for Shiva. I think
it was, yeah.
Right, which ended up becoming a Buddhist temple. But there's still pockets of Hindu or deeply rooted Hindu influences that still exist in Southeast Asia and in Eastern Asia as well, to a certain extent. But you look at Bali, for example, in Indonesia, where Hinduism still exists, but in its own almost nearly indigenized form of Hinduism. And therefore, the question there is, well, how did the relationships between peoples and how did the relationship between people and snakes travel with that spirituality over there? Right? And same thing with Buddhism, right? Buddhism also being a dharmic spirituality with Hinduism, where it obviously grew to become a very big thing in East Asia. You have Mahayana Buddhism throughout East Asia, and then you have Theravada Buddhism in Southeast Asia as well. In addition to Mahayana Buddhism, you have Zen Buddhism in Japan. And there's documentation showing that actually there might have been the taboo against the killing of snakes having been brought over with Buddhism in Japan and in ancient China as well. Now, of course, that's been lost in a lot of ways and in a lot of places, but it can still be present in some places. So, for example, some temples in Japan or some areas in Japan, there's still a taboo against the killing of snakes, and whether that's because of Buddhism or whether that's because of the general local history that the people have with the snakes, I don't know, but that would be an interesting question to explore.
It would be, yeah.
What's the role that history had, or what role did history play into that current relationship that people have with snakes?
Yeah.
Right, because there's some places in Japan, like, for example, Kozushima, which is one of the islands in the Izu Islands, which I've also spent a lot of time on. It's actually one boat ride away from Tokyo. You hop on the boat 8 hours, sleep under the deck, wake up, you're there.
Wow.
And over there, there's this rat snake, this Japanese rat snake that's found everywhere, and it eats these lizards, and there's this interesting interaction between snakes and lizards there. But there's generally a sense of friendliness towards the snakes by the true locals, the ones who have been there for a long time, where they don't, they try to go out of their way so to not kill the snakes, that kind of thing. And that's also true in other parts of the mainland as well. There's some, I've read about some parts of Japan where people don't kill snakes. But again, whether that's related to ancient myths that may have been influenced by Buddhism or have been simply completely generated indigenously, I'm not sure, but that's, again, an interesting route to kind of explore using history.
It is. Another interesting route, which I, it just came to my mind as you were speaking, is the relationship that people have with snakes and body art. Because I've seen, snakes manifest into body art on several individuals across cultures. Since we're on the topic of Japan, I've seen it on Japanese people as well. And I wonder what it represents across cultures,
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the relationship of snakes to ancient Greece?
I don't know. I don't know much about it, but of course, as mentioned before, there's a rod of Asclepius, where of course the snake has this association with medicine, right?
Where does that association come from? Do you know?
I don't know.
There's a story there.
There's a story there.
Yeah, I recall.
You know the story?
Unfortunately, so I don't know the story behind it, but I know why I Googled it. It's because I was at the hospital, like something had happened to me, and I was there throughout the night. And the morning of, I exited the hospital, and I was just waiting for a cab. And while I was waiting for the cab, I think the ambulance pulled up, and it was like like the person was wheeled out, doctors, nurses like coming out, like checking on them. And in that whole process, I remember looking at the snake on the ambulance and just wondering, like, why? So I Googled it, and I just can't remember. Yeah.
Well, it might make sense in some parts of the world far from Greece. For example, India is known to be one of the places most afflicted by envenomous snake bite.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a strong medical association with snakes. Maybe not.
Not for the right reasons.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Interesting. Snakes, or like the exploration of snakes and culture, has brought you to Africa as well, right?
That was earlier.
That was earlier.
That was something
unrelated to snakes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not related. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I mean, your time in Asia is coming to an end for now.
Yeah.
For now. You know. Yeah, you'll be back. You love Asia.
Well, there's always, the world is turning so fast, and there's always different kinds of paths opening and closing and shifting and redirecting. So
yeah,
there's always a way to go wherever.
Are you allowed to talk about where you're headed after this?
I'll keep it on the lowdown for now.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
But what are you excited about, without revealing too much? What are you excited about with your research and where it's headed, and generally like new avenues that you can see on the horizon for yourself?
I think it's always a good exercise to try and reshift your perspective a little bit, shuffle your perspective a little bit. And that might come with a change in geography or change in social circumstances, a change in cultural circumstances, all of that. So I think reshifting your perspective is a very important process to do every now and then. Press that refresh button.
Yeah.
See whether what you thought over there for that long really still makes sense and still standing from over here and watching over it, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So, looking at one mountain from one side of the river versus looking at that same mountain from across the river, you might see a different face of the mountain. The light might shine on it differently. And I'm always curious about what it is, what that other side is.
Yeah. Of the same mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah. While every now and then taking trips to different mountains just for fun and perspective.
And exercise.
Exercise is important.
Yeah.
Felix, a question we ask on this show at the end. Given where you are in life right now, what's a conversation that you would have with the younger version of yourself? And what is a conversation that you're hoping to have with an older version of yourself at any point in time?
A conversation.
Yeah.
So a back and forth exchange.
A back and forth exchange from where you are in life right now.
I guess it would have to do, since children are so sensitive to social interactions, I think in that very much as it's a very strong, it's a very strong influence on how the development, it has a very strong influence on the path of development of a person, I think. And so really, I think it would be having the conversation about what are your interactions with your peers like? Who are they? Who do you spend the most time with? How does that feel like? What happens when you spend time with those other people? How does that feel like? What do you learn from that? What have you learned so far from those interactions? What kinds of people would you like to meet more? That kind of thing. So I guess in a back and forth kind of way. Yeah. Then I guess that could go with my future self as well. But I guess in my future self, it'd be more about the works. It would be more about talking about the feelings I would have about the works that I've put out. Whether that's physical works, whether that's paintings, whether that's writings, whether that's anything else that might be digital or physical again, whatever it might be, or social. Yeah. So the output.
The output of your life. And I guess how you're...
The imprint.
The imprint. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. For whatever. It might be for whoever. It might be for the future generations. It might be for my direct descendants. It might be just for history in general. It might be for my own personal being, my own personal satisfaction. It might be for my direct family. It might be for whoever, for peers, for whoever might be. But yeah, just having that conversation in general.
Nice. I feel like that could have been its entire own leg of conversation, the thing to do with legacy. What kind of legacy you're trying to leave behind. But oftentimes, I think this is hard to define while you're on the journey. It's much easier to see when you look back, at everything that you've done.
Yeah, and it's very easy to get caught up in the legacies that others have left behind.
True.
Whether it may be books, authors that you highly respect, or whether it be musicians that you look up to, or whether it might be artists that you're extremely interested in. So it's really easy to be caught up in all of that and forget that you're you.
Yeah.
And as an individual, you might have had your own calling.
Yeah.
And how do you follow that calling? How do you recognize that calling? And how do you heed to that calling and follow through with it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really powerful thought, and I would just like to hear your thoughts on what a calling means, and how can you hear what your calling is. I think that's a powerful question just to leave off with our conversation, if you can answer that.
It might come down to childhood. It might come down to your initial interest in childhood that really captivated the mind. It might be your current interest right now, but it might be spirituality. There might have been a passage you might have read somewhere that might have just, resonated with you in a way that has never resonated with you before. So it can happen differently for anybody, but if you know, you know.
If you know, you know.
If you know, you know. But when you have that calling, follow through with it. I think ignoring a calling, ignoring that intuitiveness can be unfortunate.
I imagine a calling reappears again and again in life. It is a calling after all, Yeah. Like if you don't hear it the first time, or if you hear it the first time, you choose to ignore it, I feel like it'll resurface at another point. But it's really up to you if you just keep ignoring if you just keep giving it like missed calls. Picking up the phone. That's
it. And, you're only on this earth for a limited amount of time.
That's right.
And what you do currently matters now, in this moment in time. So to be mindful of it and to understand the tools at your disposition and what you could do with them and what that might mean for others, I think is good.
Yeah. Felix, my man, thank you for such an entertaining and insightful conversation. I got a lot from this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, love and respect to you.
Love and respect. Thank you.